And welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz here, and Michael D. Shaw is my guest. We're live streaming here and podcasting. Mike, how are you?
Hey, just great. Just great. What about you? How's everything in lovely New England?
Really good. The usual BS, but yet I count my blessings, like we all should and do. To just have been born in this country is a great blessing. Especially people realize this when they go overseas. They come back and they go, the good old US of A is not so bad.
Well, as a matter of fact, what happened during the World Cup, when all these Euros came over and they were saying, gee, people have air conditioning?
I know, they're going into Walmart and they're amazed. Like, wow, you have such variety.
Yeah, gee.
I can buy 6 brands of toothpaste. I mean, it's just any, the littlest thing. It's something that's like we take for granted. We all unfortunately saw the disgusting spectacle of Fauci's testimony. He starts out by arrogantly attacking Rand Paul and with that smug, dose of arrogance on his face. And then he refused to answer every question, including what color his tie was.
And what color the carpet was.
Exactly. I don't know if there's ever going to be a reckoning. I understand that Josh Hawley, who I don't completely trust, because he's one of these guys, sort of like what's his name in the House from Ohio. You know who I mean? Jordan, yeah. A lot of
Trey Gotti.
Oh, well, Trey Gotti was bad, but I mean, those guys sound great. They go on Fox News, a lot of wind, but nothing happens. They've been yammering on and on for years. Sure, we're exposed to truths. We can all see what's going on, but yet it's all just, moving along and nothing happens. And I think Hawley says now that Fauci could be held in contempt because he did receive the auto pen pardon, and as such, they're not able to prosecute him for anything that happened at the time of the pardon and before, which means that according to his legal theory, he has to testify, and that if he doesn't testify, he's in contempt of Congress. Now, that's quite a dare. And I think that Rand Paul himself is at least one of the few people who might have the guts to trigger that and to bring contempt charges against Fauci. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. I'm on one hand pessimistic about any legal remedies occurring as such. However, you must take into context the fact that this guy is a narcissistic egomaniac.
Right.
And the mere fact that he's being exposed as a mountebank and a scoundrel at age 85 is pretty good punishment. Okay? Deep down, he's been getting away with it for a long time. I mean, as I constantly remind everybody, somehow his misconduct during AIDS, everybody forgets about.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
For reasons which I've never understood, he kept his job all these years at the highest salary in the federal government. All right. Number one, he's not very smart. He either has stuff to blackmail people about, or it was one of these things that he got to such a point that, gee, if we now get rid of this guy, the question will come out is, where the hell were you for the last 35 years? So I think he's going to be, on the one hand, protected by the system. The system, no one within the system ever really gets hurt. I mean, there are exceptions, Alger Hiss, but you and I could name these kind of people on the fingers of one hand. Most of them get away with it. Whatever
They
happened to
did-
Harry Dexter White? Not very much.
Well,
So,
he had a mysterious heart attack on the train ride to Washington where he was going to testify. Is what happened to Harry Dexter White.
yeah.
And I think that that's an example of what. Not that that would happen to Fauci. I hope. I'm not saying it should, and I'm not wishing it on him. But he could be used. He could be sacrificed if things got very hot.
Oh, I agree.
Already you have Birx, the scarf lady, who is recommending that people put on goggles and 5 masks, and
Yeah.
who was basically a relative of hers, dropped a dime when she went on TV and said, no Thanksgiving this year. People need to stay locked down. And then she got on a plane and went to Thanksgiving with her own family. Somebody
Right.
at that table dropped a dime and she ended up losing her job. So that can happen, but even she's throwing Fauci under the bus now. So what you see is maybe they're going to kind of do a limited hangout and hold him out there. And maybe you're right, he has enough goods on everyone else to blackmail people. It's kind of like Anthony Weiner. Remember the laptop?
Oh,
He,
yeah.
there was a folder on there called insurance policy. We'll never see what's in it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, he knew who did what with whom, and he had evidence. So I don't know if that's going to save Fauci, but the bigger picture is that today's Gateway Pundit did a pretty good article where they listed a long list of the criminals who were very much in cahoots with Fauci. People like, Walensky and Collins and Hotez, Dr. Hotez, and all these other people who got on TV and lied about exaggerating the pandemic so they could scare the crap out of everyone and lock people down and get people to agree to this massive social engineering scheme. This conspiracy is what I'd call it, to make, shut down school children from school, people putting on masks out in public. In California, they shut beaches. The shutting down any opposition to this as people who are conspiracy kooks, demonizing them, destroying them, including some doctors who were among America's most respected doctors who simply were criticizing this agenda. Doctors like Peter McCullough, and we know all of their names. I mean, Malone, who was one of the inventors of the RMNA technology, all demonized because they criticized Fauci, Mr. Science. But it's what he represented. It's this, I mean, it seems to me to be an international cabal of people who wanted to engage in what was the biggest social experiment in our lifetime. Now, with Fauci, I have a lot of Twitter accounts, people that I follow on Twitter who are liberals and left wingers. And in reaction to this disgusting display on his part, I was seeing comments of the hero of the little guy. Pictures of Fauci looked like in past generations, you'd have Stalin, right? With this image of the big head. They always show like real close up of the person looking very heroic. And this kind of idol worship, I mean, I want to talk about what that is, because these are not witting people doing this. These are useful idiots. They're leftists who don't really know why they believe this. I had 2 very ultra left relatives of mine, or relatives of my wife, who both on separate occasions told me, they wanted me to know, that they, quote, love, unquote, Anthony Fauci. This was years ago.
Based on what exactly?
No, that's
Did
the
they know
thing. They have no idea. They have no,
Yeah.
this is what I'm saying. Just the same reason why people loved Stalin or loved Hitler,
Yeah.
for that matter. They have no idea. They're completely unwitting. They're stooges. It's what Lenin called useful idiots. It's they're just glomming onto this thing, and I think that Fauci is kind of leaning on that and depending on that, and maybe it even fuels his own delusions about himself. But he figures, at the end of the day, after I ride out this little spot of unpleasantness, these will be the people who are going to write the history books. People like Michael Beschloss, the American historian who basically accused, he wanted Trump to be tried for treason because he released nuclear secrets, allegedly. Or that other historian, that Lichtman, who wanted Trump impeached because of his, quote, war on women, unquote. I mean, they figured that these are the people, and he may be right, that are going to write the history books, that are going to fix everything. It may not happen today, but it'll happen down the road. And that those who oppose Fauci will all be forgotten. Everything will be glossed over. And and this is what I want to talk about. I think that he might be right. I mean, it's sort of the same, it's going to fall down the same rabbit hole as the stolen 2020 election, as the COVID itself. I mean, and it wasn't just Fauci, as I say, he was just the sort of the head of the snake. I mean,
yeah, he was the poster child because he loved being on TV.
That's right. He was good. He would go to any media he wanted. He wanted to be on Dancing with the Stars. It went to his head. He was the ego, as you say, he was an egomaniac, and so he was a good front man for all of this. But you had these blue state governors, including Cuomo, and you had others who were putting COVID active people in nursing homes. We know that Fauci, he according to his diary, you can see that he was lying about the numbers. It was much less than what he was talking about publicly. So that tells you that they wanted to create fear. They wanted to create national and international fear that would make people give up basic freedoms. And there has never been anything like that in our lifetime, where people literally were locking themselves down. They wouldn't go outside their front door without a mask. I know this situation. I lived through that in terms of people in my family who got totally enraptured by this. I mean, I don't want to go too personal, but I mean, at the height of it, I recall being forced to wear a mask on the street. And when I came home, I had to take all my clothes off and put them in the laundry, shower, put on new clothes, put on gloves, so that we could then take groceries out of the bag after wiping each one of them down with the antiseptic. I mean, it got really bad. I mean, I know my situation was probably a lot worse than most people's.
Well, think of it this way. Okay, you're right. It was a social experiment, and the people that perpetrated it won.
Yeah, and they scared the crap out of
it. There was total compliance. I mean, never forget that there were only about 15% of us who didn't take the vaccine. All right. Yeah. And the fact that Fauci himself was vaccine injured.
Is that right?
Oh, my goodness. In his own diary, in June 2021, he writes that he had a pulmonary infarct, which basically a blood clot in the lung.
Right.
This was kept secret. He was treated, presumably at Walter Reed or Naval Medical Center or someplace, quietly. So, the interesting thing here is that his head was so far up his own ass that even the fact that he himself nearly died, he had to suppress in order that this wonderful agenda would keep going. I mean, think about that for a minute. You've been doing this, and you're talking about how important all this is. You yourself nearly died because of the vaccine. So instead of coming up and saying, gee, folks, I guess I was wrong, he had to keep up the charade.
I'm surprised he even took the vaccine. He didn't take a saline solution. I remember at the time.
Yeah, I didn't think he did.
Yeah, we talked about that. We figured all these people, and all these crooked types, they all took saline solution publicly. Biden, he had himself injected publicly to make sure everybody knew. I'm surprised that they actually believed this. I mean, were they like as suckered into it as the rest of us? I guess so.
Well, this is the definition of a true believer.
Yeah.
Okay. He was very effective at what he did because, as the expression goes, he believed his own BS. All right.
I would point
Because,
out that the vaccine itself only entered the market. And by the way, we now know that after all the hyping that Trump did for it, oh, I'm going to come up with this. They appealed to his ego. And he was saying, well, we'll have this great vaccine. They delayed it until after the election. Another example of election stealing, because they didn't want him to get credit. That's a fact. That's been proven.
oh,
But
yeah.
but that the vaccine itself, by the time of the election, and the virus itself, as had waned. I'm not saying there wasn't a virus; it was real, but the bad strain of it was pretty much over, and this kind of lesser strain, I forget what they called it, that was the one that was around, and it was not life-threatening, or it was much milder. So the vaccine itself really wasn't even there to address that. And yet, the regime that came in after Trump was removed immediately implemented that vaccine in a hand that was so heavy and authoritarian that, again, it just was continuing. They continued the emergency, even though it was over. And they were implementing a rollout of that vaccine that included, we should remind people, you had to have a vaccine card to get into buildings. I had one. I had to, at the time I was going to college in person, and I had to show a card or they wouldn't let me through the door. You had to show, and you had to wear a mask in the college. This is long after this is in 2021. The vaccine, the pandemic was over, whether it really existed or not. And yet they continued with very heavy-handed authoritarian approaches. And the only thing that I think they would have continued that indefinitely had it not been for the great Canadian truckers. The Canadian truckers stopped it. They really did. It just shows that you can have an incident in history where people use their agency and they get together and they use whatever power they have to stop something. It's like in medieval times, people showing up with pitchforks, right? I mean, the Pogo cartoon, the peasants are revolting, right?
Yeah.
And the truckers blocked the highways of Canada, and that the economy was about to come to a complete standstill, and that trucker strike was spreading into the United States, Australia, New Zealand, France, even Israel. Truckers were standing up and saying no to the vaccine cards. That's all they said. We're not going to take the card. We're not going to be carded.
That's right. You understand, Chuck, the beauty of that was that all these highfalutin Fauci type individuals that were perpetrating this outrage never thought that these lowly blue collar individuals would be empowered to the extent that they could shut it all down. So this was fatal hubris on their part, like a Greek tragedy almost. If you
But they would have shut it all down. They were going at that point. I mean, I followed Naomi Wolf. I'm not saying that she's absolute gospel in terms of her expertise, but she was documenting how the card was about to go into a digital format, in which case you would have to show digitally that you had been vaccinated, and that this digital app would have your personal health information on it. It could be expanded to include anything.
A social credit system.
Exactly. And it would have been worldwide. They were talking about it. It had been written about it. Schwab at World Economic Forum had written about this before the vaccine, and that this was the new age. It was really rolling out at the time of the truckers. And the truckers put a stop to it. They were demonized. The Trudeau government actually shut down their bank accounts. You talk about totalitarian. I mean, they were like starved. They were called Nazis, even though, by the way, the majority of them were not were men of color. They were not white. Most of them, I think, are from Pakistan or India. Um, and they were, but yet they stood firm, and the Canadians buckled. They had to, because otherwise everything would have come to a screeching halt. Truckers run economies. I mean, they move all goods from point A to point B. You're not going to get anything happening without truckers. And it had a reverberant effect across the world. As I've said, here in Boston, we had our newly elected, pretty radical mayor, Michelle Wu, had just taken office, and one of her first acts was to sign a city ordinance saying that you could not enter a restaurant or a apartment building or any public venue without showing your vaccine card. That was pulled away because of the truckers, because the truckers were around that time, and nobody paid any attention to it anyways. Even Cambridge and Somerville, very leftist suburbs, didn't go along with it. But the point I'm making is that the whole thing was rolling out in a big way at the time the truckers stood up. And
the sad part is they tried to impose totalitarianism, and the way the media covered it was shameful. All right, anybody with a brain, regardless of how you felt about the vaccine, should have said, "Wait a minute, you're turning this place into Nazi Germany here." And the sad part for me was the compliance of most people.
It is, yeah, it is sad. And
I mean, to be honest, I was able to, now I can say this, I guess, I was able to obtain some forged vaccine cards just in case.
I wish I had done the same. One of my biggest regrets over the past 5 years was that I went along with that goddamn vaccine.
Well, it was just one of these things. I never actually used it, but it was a choice that, and I had like-minded friends, let's say, who were able to, and who knew like-minded doctors. So I guess the word forged is probably not correct. They were legit, but I never had a vaccine.
Right.
So, but that was the sad thing for me. And I guess the other sad thing is, if you look at the media, what's in it for Dana Bash at this point to be such a blithering idiot kiss ass on this subject? Okay, yeah, I get it. Pharma is a big advertiser on CNN, but good grief, is it worth whatever credibility you have left?
They still are. I mean, this is still, you're still censored for talking about this. I wouldn't go on TikTok today because I know that I'll be shut down. It's still a verboten subject, and I mean that in the German sense. You cannot criticize the vaccine, and you cannot criticize COVID. It's just that simple. It's in the same category as criticizing the 2020 election, criticizing Biden. You still can't do it. These things are.
Chuck, the bigger issue here.
Yeah.
And the reason it was so heavily promoted and now so heavily denied, if you will, is that this was a case of big government failing utterly, epic failure. Okay. Now, how many more insanely bad failures can the government take before it falls apart? Okay. Debbie Schlussel said this is an intelligence test and you failed. But I think it's more than that. It's that we just can't have it. Okay. It was an utter failure, and we have to rewrite history in any way we can. Those of us who lived through it know damn well what happened. And you're right. The history is going to be distorted because all the historians are liberals. And I never understood, to be honest, why this became a liberal conservative issue, other than liberals are basically all totalitarian.
Well, I think that's what it is. I think that that's why you have useful idiots showing pictures of Fauci looking like Stalin, and oh,
Yeah.
hero. This guy. I don't know if you follow Ed Krasenstein. He's about as dumb as a turnip. I mean, it's awful, but he's a huge TikTok leftist with heroic, and he shows pictures. And the thing I think that what's underlying that is there's a nostalgia for the pandemic because it was a collectivist authoritarian experience.
Nostalgia for the pitch
Yeah,
of the good God.
nostalgia for the pandemic. The days
You got to
when
write that book. Write that book.
I should. It's the days when people didn't leave the house unless they were wrapped in some napkin around their nose. They couldn't, you couldn't go close to people. I remember walking down the main street in the broad daylight outside, and somebody would be coming the other way. You'd have to turn, and you had to wipe food off, and you put it. And Burke said you have to put on goggles. This is complete tyranny. It is a complete. I mean, and it's also a complete sellout of any kind of logic. Nobody in their right mind was saying, "Oh, this is good." Like, I mean, eventually you were allowed to go to restaurants, but you could only take the mask off if you were eating, which is the most vulnerable time you would get a virus. But then you have to put it back on when you
Yeah.
got
Oh,
up.
yeah.
And then, of course, once the George Floyd death, it was perfectly okay to go out and rally without masks because it was like, oh, I see. I remember having this argument with a liberal member of my family. I'm like, so then explain to me, the virus doesn't jump from one person to the other because they're protesting George Floyd. I get it. That only happens if it's truckers in Sterling, South Dakota, which they were viciously attacking because they didn't wear masks. There you have the virus suddenly says, oh no, we can infect these people. I mean, the thing made no sense. And I think that became quite obvious. So it really did come down to a political thing. It was
Well,
authoritarian.
unfortunately, worse than that. If you look at this, and again, this has probably been even more suppressed. As Archbishop Vigano reminds us, the Vatican totally betrayed the world by
Yes,
going along with this and forgetting that even during the Black Plague, Mass was still offered. The fact that Mass was shut down for a couple of months during this period is unconscionable.
it's
And
terrible.
believe me,
I
it
expected
was
more
it
from the
was
Catholic
enforced.
Church.
I mean, look, I'm telling you that in my parish, when I was living in Virginia then,
Yeah,
what happened on the very day that they decided to enforce this, I'll never forget this. The priest said, okay, we can't have a mass, a public mass. However, I will celebrate a personal mass at this time. And if you wish to come up and take some communion, I guess it's okay. All right.
hmm
Well, he thought he was being clever and he was a brave guy and he got shut down that very day. All right.
Oh, it was terrible. And I expected more from the Catholic Church here in Boston. I get the fact that synagogues are going to be a bunch of wussies, who they'll shut it down, and they did. They would have Shabbos services by Zoom, so you could watch it at home. But I expected more from the Catholic Church, and they folded like a cheap deck of cards in Boston. They were worse than the synagogues. They shut down before that.
Well, unfortunately, it was who the Pope was, and it was that whole regime.
Yeah.
And I guess the sad part of it, even priests, I mean, I didn't certainly search her out very much, but the pastor at my church was very conservative. He tried to play games with it, and he got shot down. So I can only assume.
Was he shut down by the community or by the church itself?
Now, what happened is that he was going against, in a clever way, let's say, what the decree was, but it didn't hold up. And as I understand it, the bishop went to him and said, "Hey, that's very nice, but you can't do that." And because obedience is a very high virtue in the Catholic Church, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah.
So it was a total failure by the church. And by the way, the current Pope, the Prevost, was in favor of this also. So you got to look at the political regime there, and that was an utter failure and a disgrace.
Well, what happened to the rank and file Catholic priests? I mean, we had one priest in Boston who at least he would go out into the parking lot and do confession with people driving up, and he had
that did occur.
Yeah,
that
so
did occur.
At least you had some people who did something, but the thing is that it was basically a capitulation on the part of a lot of institutions, conservative. You think we're conservative?
But you have to look at it from the point of view of the individual priest. Okay, the guy in this case, and I won't mention names, was a well-known, pretty respected theologian. He was a good guy. He was respected, but he was a conservative Catholic priest. However, we all have to live in the world, even the priests. So at some point, if he doesn't play ball with the Archdiocese of Arlington, there's going to be other problems for him.
Right, I get it.
In fact, this was a very visible, fairly wealthy parish. Maybe he thought he could get away with some of it, but at the end of the day, he had to look and check it. It just didn't balance out. So his hands were tied. Now, the sad part is the bishop has tremendous autonomy and probably could have gone ahead and said, to hell with this, we're going to keep it open. But none of them did. None of them did.
And it was also just the fear factor that was very coordinated. This again gets into conspiracy, where you had people, say, oh, there's going to be millions of people dropping dead on the street. Who was that guy in England who said this? And I remember that here locally, there was this guy who, I don't remember his name. He was very good looking, very healthy looking, athletic actor and action figure who died from some mysterious disease, which was horrible. I mean, like his limb had to be amputated and he had this, and his wife came out and said, oh, he's falling apart. And the media said, oh, this is because of COVID. And, when you saw that, it was right at the beginning, and it scared the crap out of you, like, holy mackerel. I mean, this could be anybody. And there were a couple of those sort of kamikaze little media events that would come and go like that, where they would just scare the bejeebers out of everyone.
Oh, you're absolutely right. But at the same time, there were these elite athletes dropping dead on the soccer field through some mysterious situation. And that was never covered and suppressed. And there were apparently hundreds of those kind of incidents. So it was a total disgrace. There's no recovery from this. So the only thing they can do is ignore it.
And as I started, we're not going to have a reckoning as long as you have people like, the media continues to run interference and talk about the Republicans are attacking Fauci, this 85-year-old man, and they're releasing his diary. How could Rand Paul do this? He's Mr. Libertarian, and yet there he is. And then you have people like Ed Krasenstein at Twitter and these useful idiots, these dumbbells, really dense, talking, ringing up the flags and, great, heroic figure. As long as we have that, we're not going to have a reckoning and a truth about what happened objectively. Never mind politics. We have to come, and the same thing is true with the election of 2020. I mean, we won't have a reckoning on it. We won't have an honest, rendering of what happened at all. And so nothing will change. It's all, I feel like Fauci did in broad daylight. He made a complete fallacy of the Constitution, made a fool of himself, but it's not going to matter. It'll blow over. Fauci knows it. Everyone else knows it. People might hold their nose for a day or two, and then it'll be over. And there's nothing that's going to be done. And you got windbags like Josh Hawley and the rest of them are going to bloviate on television and get their fat faces on Fox News so they can look good. They can do damn thing.
No, I would agree. I mean, it seems like a depressing way of looking at it, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
I think it's also tied in with the fact that you're living in essentially an atheist society. Okay. So you have to worship something, and then you worship the government. And the government can do no wrong. I mean, there were people after the fall of Stalin who lamented the fact that Uncle Joe was gone. Make that make sense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and the establishment was all, I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt did her column in the New York Times, Dear Uncle Joe.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this was, I mean, he was a hero of the masses.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. What was the reason for her cult exactly? I never understood that either.
She was converted to leftism. She actually had started out as a conservative.
Yeah.
She was.
Very few people remember that. Yes.
She was groomed by this guy, this political operative by the name of, I think, George Howe. He was like a operative who kind of managed Roosevelt. Roosevelt, you get these people. I've seen this myself. They insinuate themselves into a political campaign, a political life, and they start to manipulate and manage things. He literally, according to her son-in-law, who divorced her daughter and who wrote a book, later on became an ultra-conservative and was denounced and demonized as an anti-Semite quite inaccurately. It was a Curtis Dahl. He wrote a book called My Exploited Father-in-Law, where he lived in the White House for the first year or two. And he said that this guy Howe would literally show up and they'd usher Eleanor Roosevelt into a private quarters and he would counsel her and teach her how to be a leftist. And he had one incident where he kind of like confronted them and he was like, you know, you can mind your own damn business. I mean, you know, but he also pointed out that Felix Frankfurter was a communist, but an interesting guy. But you know,
I mean, I had always thought. I mean, I didn't know all this backstory, but I always thought she was raised up. And you know, this is going to sound terrible, but think about it. She was very championed by women because she was ugly. So most women felt superior to her and made her the big queen. I mean, look at this. She could be the first lady looking like that.
Sure.
Let's be honest. All right.
Okay. I'll go with that. I think.
And FDR married her to show he was really a credible guy, much like Clinton married Hillary. Hey, you know what? I'm a big player, but to show you how serious I am, I'm going to marry this ugly broad. And that shows you, right? It's just terrible. But there you are.
But yeah, it became like a rotten. And meanwhile, FDR himself, according to Curtis Dahl, was literally held as a prisoner in the White House. He was invalid. He obviously was, he couldn't walk, and he was surrounded by communists living in bedrooms or down the hall. People like Laughlin Curry, who after the war fled to China before testifying. He was chief legal counsel. And Virginius Franco, the head of the World Bank, also fled to Beijing. And others of these operatives who were outright communists, who were manipulating the White House. They were in the White House. They were holding him hostage, basically. I mean, they would vie him with drinks every night. He didn't know what the hell was going on. He was like kind of like compromised. And toward the end of his life, after meeting with Stalin at Yalta, with Alger Hiss there on his shoulder, whispering in his ear, one of his main operatives, who right after that meeting went on to Moscow, where he secretly received some great award from Stalin. He finally, Winston Churchill called him and said, you know, we've been had. Stalin is moving in and conquering Eastern Europe. All of the gains that we've made from defeating Hitler are down the toilet. There's going to be a huge war. He's going to occupy all of Europe. And Roosevelt suddenly woke up and said, you're right. And he started to speak out. And he's like, hey, this is bad. He was like flipping out. and then he suddenly died. Yeah, I think possibly quite conveniently. I'm not. Who knows what happened? He was
Well,
not.
he was in fairly poor health.
Yeah, he was, but nevertheless,
Whether he was helped along, again, one of these interesting questions of history. Another guy that succumbed to all this was George Patton, who died
right.
very mysteriously.
Yes.
I'm sure it didn't help his cause when he said, "Holy crap, we fought the wrong enemy."
Yeah, he was ready to roll the tanks into Moscow. He and that I covered that in my book, Assassination in America. I did a chapter on Patton. That was a pretty blatant attack. He was riding down the highway in the Autobahn with there wasn't a car in sight, and suddenly this car comes out and smashes the car, and then he's taken to the hospital with a damage. Like I think his neck was not broken, but he was, seriously injured. And he's there calling his wife, saying, "Get me the hell out of here! They're going to kill me." And she couldn't get there in time. That to me seems like a pretty obvious assassination.
Well, okay, here's the thing, that what is the commonality between the assassination of Patton and the perpetuation of this COVID pandemic? All right. The fact that, other than, quote, conspiracy theorists like you and me, although I think it's another thing, anybody that believes that the death of Patton was not mysterious or conspiratorial, there's got to be an idiot at this point. But the fact is, if you look at a conventional history book, you're not going to see it.
Oh no.
Because, so ultimately,
there are people that
the
there's nothing like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the parallel here is that we have to keep the glorious institution alive. And that's the same reason they went after Joe McCarthy.
Of course.
All right. I mean, how do you justify the fact that there were, 300,000 casualties or whatever the number was in World War II, and yet we lose Eastern Europe, we lose China. So what was the point of the war?
Exactly. I mean, it's basically, the communists were able to occupy about a quarter of the surface of the globe after the war, and they were at least as bad as the Nazis, if not worse. The Nazis were willing to surrender to the West and fight on against the Soviets, which is something that actually, and get rid of Hitler, which is something that you would have thought we would have supported. There were meetings about that. The Nazi Foreign Minister Canaris met with American and British officials in Istanbul and talked about this. We'll get rid of Hitler and we will have an armistice with the West and we'll fight Russia. But that was not, they wouldn't go along with that.
I think you have to, though, I mean, to be honest, you have to realize the American public was damn sick of the whole business.
Right.
And I think that was also the reason why the bombs were dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the American public was sick of it. And it just had to come to a nice, clean ending. And of course, it wasn't clean, obviously.
Right.
But that's why the 50s, it looked like everybody was kind of on drugs, This is great. Everything's wonderful. Of course, it wasn't. And it's just kind of ends up being the way history is told. But that whole business about us getting together with the Germans and fighting the Soviet Union, it's very hard to find that in any conventional history book.
Right. And the whole thing was nixed by this establishment that, quite frankly, in the United States, certainly, and I think in Britain also, was pro-Soviet. They didn't want that. They wanted to, once Hitler double-crossed Stalin, who was his ally, suddenly they shifted gears overnight and Germany became like a fascist evil, which it was, but putting that aside, I mean, before that, they didn't do that. They took a 180-degree turn. And so there was not going to be any kind of a settlement. There could have been the end of Nazism in Germany, and Germany would have been left intact to defend Europe against Hitler, against Stalin. Didn't happen. Could have happened. Anyway, that's history. Now you have, of course, it makes me think about what's going on with Iran. I think that what I see right now is that Trump really has stepped in it. There's not going to be a settlement with Iran unless the United States wants to drop nuclear bombs, which I don't think we should do, or we should go in with troops, which I don't think we should do. I think Trump is trying to get some kind of a peace agreement to save face, by saying, okay, we'll keep the Strait of Hormuz open and you'll stop the nuclear. And he can then, wash his hands of it. The Iranians know this, and they're not going to give it to him. They're not going to do it. They're not going to meet him. There's going to be nothing, because they know that they can just dribble the ball until he's maybe until the midterms. Maybe they take a long view of history, and that it just looks like increasingly, like I said last week, like a quagmire. I mean, in the long term, I think the better approach would be the Keenan approach, which is containment. But that doesn't happen quickly, and Trump likes things to happen quickly. It's not going to happen. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, though. If you wanted things to happen quickly, he could take out the infrastructure.
Right. He could.
But it's very difficult to fight a war with both hands tied behind your back. I mean, so right. This is, and again, I believe the problem here is that he listened to these Colonel Blimp military types. So nothing's changed since Vietnam, right? Well, right. On paper, they live Robert McNamara, the Wonder Boy. Well, on paper, we should be able to beat the North Vietnamese pretty easily.
Although we now know that the rules of engagement were, in terms of Vietnam, is that we were fighting with one arm behind our back.
Yeah,
we could have beaten the North Vietnamese if
of
we
course.
Were they had all these strange rules, like an airplane couldn't take off unless it was this or that, and you couldn't do bomb here, but you could only bomb there.
Oh, well, I mean, the stories that I got from guys, remember, that was my era.
Yeah.
The guys went over there. The rules of engagement were such that, okay, you're on patrol and you find this group that you want to engage, and you get to mile marker so-and-so, and you have to stop.
Exactly. You can only go halfway up the hill. You can't go all the way.
Yeah.
So this is something that's never been explained. But the point is that, eventually it just bled the country dry, both sides. We lost 50,000 men.
For no reason.
For no reason. And then in 1973, there was a peace deal signed at Paris. Kissinger marches in and gets the Nobel Prize. And then 3 months later, the Republicans lose Congress, and that the new Democrats, headed up by Ted Kennedy and the newly elected Senator Joe Biden and Leahy of Vermont, they cut South Vietnam off at the knees. They shut down all military aid. They shut down all relations with South Vietnam. And it was only a matter of, I think, a month or two that North Vietnam launched a full-scale invasion and conquered South Vietnam. So, we, in a sense, had one, at least, I mean, at a very poor cost. And, part of the Paris Agreement, there were side treaties by which we did promise to help South Vietnam, economically and certainly militarily, in terms of at least giving them the weapons they needed. All of that was betrayed. All of that was cut off. And the result was catastrophic. So again, I mean,
even that famous picture of Ambassador Graham being rescued by helicopter on the top of the embassy.
Yeah.
He was a hero. He was trying to save as many people as he could.
Right.
He was able to get military support to help save more people. And he was suddenly erased from history. It was deplorable. And you think a lesson would have been learned, but it wasn't.
No.
It just wasn't. Was a lesson learned from COVID? Yeah, maybe by some individuals like you, for example. But there are no lessons from this other than the grand and glorious establishment has to keep going. I mean, I don't know how Dana Bash can live with herself attacking RFK Jr. What's in it for her? I don't understand.
I think that in the end of the day, they're not going to be able to do another one of those type of plandemics where people are going to be willing to shut down like that again. There will be some who will. There's some who still shut down. Yeah. I remember my doctor, my personal doctor, before she took an about face and changed, she said to me, I know people who are never going to leave the house again. They'll never take off the mask. And she was right. I still see it. I still see people with the mask, in broad daylight in Brookline, Massachusetts, walking down the street. So, yeah, they'll never change. But I think that enough people have become, as they say in the culture, red-pilled. I don't think they're going to get people to shut down quite like that again. I think that the Canadian truckers changed that dynamic. They didn't get rid of those authoritarian laws, but they put them into the drawer for a while. They'll try to pull them out again, maybe, but I don't think it'll work unless it's something so horrendous. Who knows what they might have up their sleeve? Anyway,
to come back to the original subject, what's going to happen to Fauci? Other than being publicly humiliated, probably nothing.
Right.
And that's too bad, but I'm cynical enough to think that is what was going to happen. So you're right. He goes back to his big house in Calorama, wherever it is, and just rides it out.
And is continued to be glorified by unfortunately, a larger segment of the population than you'd expect. And I don't know. I think of the late Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, a dear friend of mine. We did hundreds of hours of programming. And he said to me, because I wrote an article called, Was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. a communist? And he advised me, he said, don't get into that. He goes, yes, he was a communist, of course, but he's been so lionized after he was assassinated. He has been put up on Mount Rushmore. He is such a idolized figure that it's just, you have to cut your losses and move on. You're not going to take him on. You have to look at the bigger picture and take on the actual issues that the communist agenda represented and go after them and cut your losses on him. Maybe Fauci is in that category, not quite, but you kind of have to say, okay, fine, let Fauci march off into the wilderness and let's talk about the pandemic. Let's talk about what happened.
I think that's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Because if someone is built up to such an extent, other than iconoclasts like you and me, that really don't worship man in this sense.
Right.
The trouble is that if you talk about a guy like King and you talk to some liberal, you get the impression that deep down they agree with you. But this is such an iconic figure.
Exactly.
That we just can't have that.
No.
Just can't have it, much the same way as many years ago, I had some discussion with a family friend, let's say, talking about Pearl Harbor and the fact that Roosevelt knew about it and so on. And his head just exploded. He just couldn't come to grips with that. And that was it. You couldn't intellectually in any manner.
No, this has become accepted doctrine, and you can't, it's sort of like if you try to go at it, then, you're going to be demonized. Although the one thing that I will not let go of, and I continue to go because it's so current, is the stolen election. We cannot let that go. It has to be adjudicated. President Trump went on and gave a national speech about it, and it was ignored. They did nothing. It's swept under the rug. I still think it's worth it, though. We have to get to the bottom of that. We can't let that sit there. That, to me, the fact that we have to take back our apparatus to have the one man, one vote is so basic and it's so real. And I'm proud of Trump for doing it. I don't know if more can be done, but that has to go forward in spite of having I think it was Joe McCarthy he came from like a farm background in Wisconsin. He once talked about like, you're not going to walk through the muck in the barn without getting some stink.
Yeah.
You have to continue to walk through the muck of this lies being told about this. And
okay, but here's your lesson. Look what happened to him.
But yet he made a difference. He's been vindicated, and you just have to he's at peace with God. He's not a demon.
Oh, I would agree, except that still in conventional history, he's portrayed as a villain.
But he still is and always will be. But nevertheless, in reality, he did make a difference. He did shift some things Whitaker Chambers is another example.
Yeah, maybe, Chuck, it's incremental, okay? But where it went wrong for him, when he went after the problems with the Army, which was completely legit, now he was attacking, again, this grand and glorious institution, and we just can't have it. By the same token, if you posit that the 2020 election was rigged, which of course it was, you now are going after this grand and glorious institution. But more than that, you're also showing that but for fraud, the Democratic Party wouldn't exist. That's the
whole point.
Yeah.
If you go after this and show the fraudulence of that election, you're going to expose it's a much bigger question. McCarthy was going after something much bigger than just communists infiltrating the government. He was going after this whole institutional support. The Reese Committee showed how the foundations were all supporting communist and leftist causes.
Oh, yeah.
It was much bigger than just the communists. And that's why he had to be taken out. The same thing is true with the election. You're absolutely right. It's much bigger than just the fraudulent election. It gets into aspects of the system itself that are so rotten and so corrupted. Even this morning, I had a conversation with a liberal friend of mine, and we were talking about how anti-Semitism has almost taken over the Democratic Party. And I mentioned that there's a case right now in Michigan where the Attorney General, Dana Nessel, happens to be Jewish, happens to be a supporter of Israel. She has decided that she's not going to attend the state Democratic primary or the state Democratic convention because of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiments amongst Michigan Democrats, and how terrible this is. And I pointed out to my friend that I agree with her. It is terrible. However, as a sidebar, Dana Nessel was a major player in the stolen election in 2020. She covered up the scandal in Muskegon County.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, why didn't she look in the mirror and ask herself why the hell she's still a Democrat? How about that?
Well, that's right too. And I said, look, I think it's horrible what's happened to her, but she was not one of my favorite people. She was involved in the election, the stolen election. And my friend's like, oh, how could I say this? And oh my God. So I said, look, I'll send you some information about what happened with Muskegon County and the way they counted tens of thousands of fraudulent votes. So, of course, I Googled it. And sure enough, what comes up are a lot of lies about that. The debunked theories, and
Yeah.
she's been vindicated. Never mind that that's untrue. Trump is and right wing fanatics. Article after article, and it's the same tenor that was happening back then. Anybody that questioned that election, and by the way, that case has been adjudicated, and it's been found that that county was handled by this corrupt organization that was turning in fraudulent ballots. I don't think there's any question about that. But yet they're still attacking and portraying this. And even now, 6 years later. So it's still an agenda that they're not going to get. That you don't mess with it. There was the candidate for DNI was asked during congressional hearing, and he completely blew it. Do you think that Biden won the election? And his answer was, I'm not going to talk about that. This was to that skunk Blumenthal from Connecticut. And what he should have said is, look, Biden was inaugurated, so therefore he won the election. But do I think he was stolen? Yes. But he did become president because of the Constitution. If you're inaugurated, you're the president. But, so he could have maybe answered it that way, but he didn't. He completely blew it. People have to stand up and say, yeah, I think it was stolen.
Well, but that's it. I mean, the key issue with Fauci did in Essel is that they were given the test, ultimately they failed. Okay, Tony baby, you nearly frickin' died. Are you going to maintain your position? Oh, yeah, because this is more important than even me, I guess. So, yeah, same question. Why is Dana Essel still a Democrat? Because she's an idiot. That's why.
That's right. Exactly. She's a true believer, and she is willing to turn a blind eye and just goose step along. It's sad. But yeah.
Because what's the alternative? Oh, my God. For my entire life, I've been wrong. Well, better than being wrong for more of your life.
No, the alternative is the orange man.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. So, Mike, what do you have coming up in the Substack?
Well, as a matter of fact, I mean, the throes of writing a Fauci piece, which unfortunately I wasn't able to finish before this broadcast, but it's, what can I say? It's worse than you might think. The Princess Diaries, as Jane Coulter called them, came out on this guy.
Oh my God! What an embarrassment!
And then we draw the contrast with that other famous diary of Anne Frank. Only Anne Frank was a 13-year-old girl that was caught between boredom and terror. And what's Tony Fauci? Some bureaucratic slop that was able to, I think, via blackmail, keep his position. It's pathetic. But here's the thing. If the government and the NIH were to actually admit, hey, you know what? Francis Collins and Tony Fauci were really terrible. Just terrible. But they can't say that because that would undermine the entire rotten, corrupt institution that it is.
I can't believe that he would be so stupid as to put that stuff on a government server. I mean, that to me is like, it's amazing. Shows how arrogant or out of touch he was.
Well, he's arrogant and ultimately stupid. All right. Yeah. If you're going to keep a diary like that, maybe you ought to keep it somewhat.
Keep it. You don't put it up in the public.
But anyway, how many 85-year-old guys do you know that keep a diary like that?
It's I mean, it's an exercise in total psychosis, not narcissism.
I mean, if you compare it to Anne Frank's diary beyond the obvious context, it's the same sort of mundane crap. Oh, gee, everybody likes me. I'm a big hero. What the hell is wrong with the guy?
Oh, my God. Yeah.
And the other thing is, if he's doing such a big job for the government, how does he have the time to write this crap every day?
Yeah, in the middle of all these lies about COVID,
Yeah.
which is what's interesting about it, the fact that he knew that it came from a Wuhan lab. He knew that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, FDA-approved drugs, were effective at dealing with viruses. That doesn't mean it would work every time, but at least people would have had a running chance. Could have saved how many lives if it hadn't been demonized by him? Anyway. All
Yeah.
right, Mike.
Well, there you
So,
go.
as always,
So,
thanks for joining me. It's a great show.
and we will see you next time.
Indeed.